Well, good morning again. So glad that you're here today. As I said earlier, we're starting today our 5-week series called Grounded, based on the book by Diana Butler Bass, Grounded. And we've had a wonderful time walking through this book as pastors and staff as we were getting prepared for it. And I do hope that you will get a copy on your Kindle and go through it with us. Because it's a wonderful way of being able to look at our world, to be able to look at how we relate to the world and how it is that we can see God in the midst of it all. Now, I have joked with all of you, I'm sure, way too many times about the fact that I don't really like the cold. I came here actually January 14th, 3 years ago. I came from Fort Lauderdale. It was 85 degrees in Fort Lauderdale. It was 35 degrees in Alexandria, Virginia when I arrived. It was a really abrupt translation between those two temperatures. And yet I know that as much as I have enjoyed the warm winter that we've been having so far, that is not actually the norm. That is not how it is supposed to be. And so the first week we're talking about natural habitat, and specifically today about climate change. And Dennis Perry invited Forbes Tompkins to come up and talk with us about this today. And now I know that as much as I love the warm weather, that there's actually some really difficult things that are happening in our world because of it. And so Forbes is an expert in that, so we are very, very glad to have him today. Will you welcome Forbes? Okay, so everybody out there is wondering why you? Why are you here? So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, first off, can everyone hear me? I just want to make sure. Are we good? Okay, great.
Okay.
So I've been a member of Aldersgate for 20 years plus now, and I grew up on Cedardale Lane, and my father still lives on Wellington, and went to Waynewood and Carl Sandburg and West Potomac, and then my studies took me to Florida State for my undergrad, Florida Institute of Technology for my first grad school, and then Johns Hopkins for my last grad school. During college, I focused on meteorology and then climate change and energy policy. And now I work at the World Resources Institute. So we're an environmental think tank, international, but based in Washington, D.C. And I help lead their local climate impacts project. So I basically, I guess I'll give you a taste of it later and explain how this all came to be. But I am now an analyst of the impacts of climate change in the U.S., and I try to communicate the technical science of climate change in a lot more easily digestible way for local governments and a wide range of audiences. So I work in Hampton Roads quite a bit. They deal with sea level rise. It's a very pressing issue there. Miami and Fort Lauderdale, I work there quite a bit, but local governments throughout the country.
Awesome. So how did you become interested in climate change?
Well, I guess I'm one of those people who's really lucky. At an early age, when you usually go to college, people are like, oh my God, I have no idea what I want to do. I was lucky when I was probably around 8 years old, as far back as I can remember, that I was just fascinated by weather. 8 years old, second to third grade, and you finally start to appreciate the value of snow days and missing school. So that's the first time I remember really being excited about a snowstorm. It was 1993. Many of you might remember it was just this historic storm of the century. It was in March, actually. And it was freezing cold outside. You know, I bundled up, but I took a fold-out lawn chair and I put it in my father's driveway, and I just sat there and just kind of watched this heavy snowfall. And there was just something majestic about it. I mean, it was just fascinating. And I wanted to know, how does this happen? You know, it was 60 degrees a couple days before. How is it freezing now, and it's pouring down snow, and it's accumulating? And how do we know this is going to happen? How can we basically tell the future to predict this type of things? And I guess what also burned that memory kind of in my mind, it's when I first fell in love with weather, is the crazy look on my father's face when he opened the door to see what I was doing, and he saw his 8-year-old son in a lawn chair just looking up at the sky in freezing cold weather and kind of get back inside. But oddly enough, you know, I concentrate on science as my profession, but it was actually Aldersgate and faith that really led me here. I imagine many of you are aware of, you know, the abroad trips that Aldersgate takes, and we help low-income communities in other countries. And I guess one of the first iterations of that was the trip to the Appalachians. So I did that in the late 90s when I was in middle school. And my initial interest, admittedly, was the first girl I ever had a crush on was going on the trip. So I wanted to be wherever she was. So sign me up, great. But what I walked away with from that trip, it was just remarkable. And it changed my life up until that day. And since then, I've never felt something like that, to see the faces of the people that we helped in West Virginia. We helped renovate some of the insulation on their homes. And, you know, we didn't feel like we weren't changing the world, but to those people we were. And just the tears that they had in the joyful tears and the appreciation they had, that's when I feel like I really first found God. I had this understanding, it just kind of hit me like, this is my purpose. This is something I want to do and feel as much as I can, and just serve, you know, through God, through my faith, somehow, and I want to do it through weather because I was fascinated by it. So that led me to being a TV meteorologist for a short stint. I was that crazy guy in the middle of the storm sideways, hanging onto a pole.
That always looks like fun, actually.
It can be fun.
Mm-hmm.
It can be fun, but that actually gave me an appreciation. And I think, as you can understand from Florida, the 2004-2005 hurricane season was record-breaking in a lot of different ways. And being at Florida State, and you know, a young, ambitious kid, I was like, well, let's just drive into these storms. This would be great. This would be really cool. And it was, and it gave me a whole new appreciation for the power of weather and extreme weather events. And it also underscored the gravity of what I was undertaking as a meteorologist, the person responsible for communicating the forecast ahead of time. Because when we were in those hurricanes, to see the livelihoods just ripped away from people, it was the complete opposite of what I experienced in West Virginia. People's lives changed forever, and in some cases, people's lives lost. And that really underscored for me, you know, I want to do something more. I really enjoy being the communicator of technical science, you know, on TV, morning, noon, and night, and, you know, engaging with the community, but I want to better serve them. I want to advance the science as much as I can, understand this more, and just through working on meteorology and studying the science, climate change kept poking its head because we were breaking more and more records. And seeing these stronger storms that we had never seen before, seeing these record high temperatures, and that ended up leading me into, you know, segueing into maybe if I could communicate the technical science of meteorology and weather, you know, could I fill that role for climate change? Because a lot of people don't understand it, and it's not the fault of anyone here. It's really complicated. So that's when I took the next step and focused on climate change. And now I am where I am, trying to better communicate it to people.
Awesome. Yeah, a lot of people in our culture, especially in the U.S. especially, I've been hearing a lot of people talking about climate change since the Pope's encyclical came out. And that was actually one of the reasons that as pastors we were reading it and talking about it, and we decided to do this Grounded series. So as a person of faith, as specifically a person of faith at Aldersgate, and as a scientist, what are some of the challenges that you see?
Yeah, well, I think it all comes back to, as a person of faith, it's environmental stewardship. It's a moral obligation to take care of this great gift that we were given from God. And I think over time, since the Industrial Revolution and what you might call the technological revolution we've seen over the last 10 to 20, 30 years, I feel like we've kind of moved away from that. We've moved away from, you know, being connected to the earth. Now we've got these really developed cities and, you know, population growth, but also technology. I mean, how many of us are talking to someone on our phone while watching a video on our iPad while at the airport getting ready to get on a flight? It's kind of, we've moved away from appreciating what we were put in charge of. So as a person of faith, that's kind of where I see the connection into climate change and the environment. But getting back to your question of, what we're kind of seeing, we're seeing the trend of warming is unmistakable. You can't ignore it. Oh, sorry.
No, and I have said many times in here that I'm more of a flip-flop person than a boot person, but it does seem like every year now is getting warmer and warmer. Is that true? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, so what's important is to kind of pull yourself back from weather, separate weather and climate. They're like cousins almost. So it can be frustrating to see, either politicians or the media. There's a huge cold snap, record snow, kind of like we had last February. They're like, well, where's climate change? The problem's solved. It's not really there. And then when we have, this past month in December, it was unbelievably warm. They're like, oh my God, well, climate change, it's the end of the world, it's doomsday, it's never gonna get cold again. It just doesn't work like that. Climate's the average of weather over a long period of time. 30 years is kind of the standard. But what we are seeing is this gradual warming of annual global temperatures. 2014 was the warmest year we've ever observed. 2015 will no doubt be the warmest. 2016 is already projected with high certainty that it will be even warmer. And what we're doing, the cause of that, what's our impact is, imagine you're out at sea and you have these waves, and they're very uniform, and you have like a crest and a trough. That's kind of what climate has always done, whether we were here or when we weren't. But imagine that wave, and then all of a sudden, 1,000-foot tidal wave. And that's kind of the impact we're having now. We're throwing things out of whack. Carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases, and temperature have a very even relationship. And those levels have changed throughout history. But what we've seen since the Industrial Revolution, the continued intensive burning of fossil fuels and, developing cities and deforestation, things like that, eliminating things that can absorb carbon. What we're seeing is kind of, we're seeing levels of carbon dioxide that we haven't seen in more than 1 million years. So you can imagine there's going to be warming associated with that. So what that's essentially doing is it's filling the atmosphere. It's almost like putting a blanket over us. And that's what greenhouse gases do. They keep us warm. Without them, if we didn't have them, in our atmosphere, it'd be freezing cold. We wouldn't be able to survive.
I wouldn't like that.
No. But imagine it was serving its purpose, keeping us warm on a cold day, and now what we've done to this point is we've added 10 blankets on top of us. So what was comfortably warm and natural, now it's just, you're sweating. It's uncomfortable. And what that's doing, all of that heat adds energy into the atmosphere, into the oceans, into the land, and it's fueling these extreme weather events. And that's kind of what I concentrate on a lot. Drought, heavy precipitation, sea level rise, stronger storms like hurricanes. It's kind of like putting a baseball player on steroids. They were going to hit home runs, get hits, hit long balls without them. But, inject them with more energy and more strength, they're going to hit it farther. And it doesn't happen, look back at 1980s, 1990s. It's not every year that, someone on steroids or when they were prevalent throughout baseball, every single year they hit more. It kind of goes up and down, but the long-term average is unmistakable. And that's kind of what we're doing right now. That's the impact we're having.
So what is the greatest challenge that you're seeing right now in that?
Well, I think we typically have this mindset of being reactive instead of proactive. And I think that's a big challenge that we need to try to overcome in a lot of ways, outside of the environment and weather, but especially in response to climate change. We typically wait for a problem to happen, like Katrina or Hurricane Sandy, and then we're reactive and we want to fix all these things. But it's been proven that, for every dollar that we invest in resiliency to prepare for these events, we save $4 in damages in the future. So you have a return on investment. So the challenge is, they go beyond environmental. They're economic, they're health, They're even, a threat to national security. And that's not just coming from me, that's the Department of Defense. I work with Naval Station Norfolk quite a bit, and it's as many of you probably know, it's the largest naval station in the world. And they are really concerned about sea level rise. They are looking at it as a 20 to 50-year horizon of the sustainability of that base. And Langley is in even worse shape. They're looking at a 20-year horizon. So it's building resiliency. We've committed ourselves to a certain amount of warming and the impacts that we're already seeing today. It's not just a year 2100 problem. We need to become resilient and adapt to those, but we can't just adapt our way out of this. We can't just build a 100-foot wall and the seas won't ever top it. We need to have a dual initiative of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to look at it as environmental or economic. They're actually really synergistic. We've done that through the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act, and there are co-benefits that come along. It can be cost effective to do these things. Who wouldn't want, affordable renewable energy that's unlimited? I think we need the challenges we need to overcome. We need to incentivize as well, being proactive instead of reactive. So I think that's kind of the foundation of where we are, the hurdle that we're trying to overcome, and we're right there. But we just need to take that one more step.
Okay. Well, and speaking of steps, I don't know about you, but when I hear about the things that are going on around the world, I hear about the storms, I hear about the impact of climate change, it seems like an insurmountable problem. And I wonder what it is that I can do, what we can do. So I would love for you to talk for just a moment about what the global community can do, and then what we specifically here in this room can do.
Yeah, so I think the global community, it's hitting on this kind of no regrets strategy. What do we have to lose? If we're going to do something and to address this problem that, almost 100% of scientists are pointing to and saying, watch out, this is coming. It's actually already here in a lot of ways. What do we have to lose if we can actually benefit from it, the co-benefits? You're being an environmental steward and you're taking care of the world that we were given, the earth that we were given to look over. And then at the same time, you're building in policies that can help economically. And the more and more that we research these things and implement them, the better off that we'll be. And it's got to be, resilience and mitigation. Prepare for what we are already seeing today, and let's limit what we're going to see tomorrow. It's kind of the saying of, pay me now or pay me more later. So that's a choice we have, I think, globally. Locally, I think you really hit on a key point. This can oftentimes seem this insurmountable doomsday scenario. And it's really important to understand that we're the ones who influence, what's going to take place tomorrow, what the priorities are of our local elected officials. The Pope hit on it in his encyclical of, we can do small things that, if you have 5 fingers, it doesn't have much of an impact, but you ball those together and you have a powerful fist. And that's what we as a community can do. So if you can recycle more, if you can carpool more or take public transportation more, you're not only, reducing some of your emissions, but at the same time, you're extending the life of your vehicle. It's cost effective for you. And if you're at the grocery store, do you really need 2 to 3 to double bag, everything that you're picking up, all your groceries? Or can you bring your own bag and just reuse it? So it's those small things, and those are kind of the choices aspect of things. And then you also have your voices, and that's where a lot of power can come from. If climate change is not a priority for you in addressing it, it's not going to be a priority for your local elected officials or state and federal elected officials. So communicating that as an urgent need. There was many polls now, probably most of you have heard of them, show that an overwhelming majority of the American public view climate change as an issue, as a problem, and they think it's something we should address. But on those same polls, they prioritize 20 issues. So they rank them, from what you're concerned about the most to the least. Climate change was one of those issues, and ranked number 20. So it's kind of understanding more that this is an issue we need to address. And if we don't prioritize it, whether you're either side of the aisle, political aisle you're on, I work with more Republicans than I do Democrats. Because when I work with local mayors, like in Hampton Roads and Virginia Beach, they're where the rubber meets the road. And a lot of these mayors, they're the mayor, but they also own a bait and tackle shop or a local restaurant that's now flooding 10 times in a year when it used to flood once every 10 years. So it's letting your voice be heard, because if it's a priority for you, it's something that they're going to want to address and be more willing to address. Let's let them argue about how to address it, but not whether the scientific problem exists.
Mm-hmm. And choices and voices, I like that. I hadn't heard that before today when you said it earlier. And so being able to make choices every day to simple things. I mean, you don't all have to get rid of your car and start walking to church. You don't have to do that. But making simple choices to be able to help to mitigate this problem a bit. But also then voices to be able to use what we have to be able to let people know that this is an issue and it's important.
That's
awesome,
right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Will you thank Forbes for coming up here today?
Thank you.
On Christmas Eve, I know that feels like a really long time ago now, but you may remember that on Christmas Eve, Dennis was talking in his part of the sermon about how we have this longing to return to Eden. And that's why we used the scripture reading that we did today. God created this beautiful world, this beautiful universe for us to inhabit, for us to enjoy and explore and learn more about God from what we see, but also for us to have the opportunity to be stewards, to care for it. And so we have an opportunity to do that, and I pray that you will. And if there is any way that we can help you to do that, if there's something that you want to start, something that you feel passionate about, please come and see one of the pastors, and we will be more than happy to talk with you about it. But it is an issue, and it's something that Aldersgate can do something very real and practical, and we can transform the world. I offer this to you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.